Hare Krishna and welcome to the Women's Collective South Africa. As part of our Paradigm Protection series, we are discussing child protection in ISKCON. We'd like to highlight this very important service and bring awareness to our devotee community about the Child Protection Office, its structure, and the work that this office does. I'm delighted to welcome Vraja Vilasini, who is in charge of child protection in South Africa, and Balai, who is her assistant. Thank you very much for taking up this valuable service and protecting our children. It is such a great task. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna.
So let's just jump right into it, Vraj. I'll put you on the spot first. How is a CPO in South Africa structured? Who is your team? And do you have a representation in every region? We have a temple or a devotee community.
Yeah, so definitely we have, so the way it's structured is that firstly, internationally, we have the International Office for Child Protection, and that's headed up by Kamlesh Krishna Das and Gandharvika Devidasi. And then each region or country then appoints a national director. So for South Africa, that is me, and that forms the Central Office for Child Protection, or informally known as CPO. Thereafter, each temple or each preaching center is required by ISKCON law to set up a child protection team, and we refer to that as a CPT. So in South Africa, all of our temples actually have representation of at least 2 or 3 members, and I'll share my screen now just so that they come up. To show who our team is in South Africa. So once the screen starts sharing, you'll see the various representatives from throughout the country who come together. So from this year, we're actually doing that once a month. We meet and we discuss different things, but each of them have teams in their region as well. So that's the basic structure that we have for child protection.
Okay, so that's great to know. So like little towns, Newcastle, Ladysmith, do you have people there too?
So we try to have, we actually do have for some of the smaller regions, but some of the smaller temples and preaching centers, because their communities are so limited, it becomes difficult for them to actually appoint their own thing. So what we then try to say is, well, if we have another region, another temple close by, then at least share resources. So for instance, PMB or somewhere else in Northern Natal to have that, and the absence thereof to actually then let the community know about myself, for instance, and Balai, so that they can always escalate to the national or central office if there are issues arising.
Okay, thank you. So what is the criteria when you appoint a CPO representative in a temple or a community?
Okay. So yes, it's a great question. It's always a difficult one as well. And what we generally advise leaders is that we need to make sure that our members need to be as representative as possible. So parents, the different constituencies, so school-going parents, parents with school-going children, members of the community, male, female, different age groups, etc., just so that your team is representative and different age groups and genders of children find them approachable. The members themselves need to be objective, mature, balanced, approachable kind of individuals. And of course, the most key part of being in the Child Protection Office is confidence. We need to maintain strict confidentiality. So special backgrounds in sort of child protection or child abuse response is not necessary, but is really helpful if we have that. So generally what we found is that educators tend to form part of this team because they, part of their education training, also receive some child protection training as well. In addition, each of those members that are appointed needs to be vetted by the Central Office for Child Protection, as well as undergo training from the CPO as well. And ideally, we don't want them to be part of the temple. It shouldn't be a temple president, that's the child protection team as well.
Okay, so what you're basically saying, it's chosen, its members from ISKCON. Do you have social workers?
So we don't have, so it's, yes, it's definitely members.
Or do you consult with social workers from the outside?
Yeah, So the child protection teams are members of ISKCON. Sometimes they are social workers themselves or psychologists or that sort of things. And we encourage each of the CPTs or child protection teams to actually form these relationships with the social worker teams and other abuse organizations in the communities, just so that you have that extended support to rely on. So for example, here in the Western Cape, I have a lot of, because I'm based here physically, I have a lot of relationship with other child protection organizations, as well as the different social services, because we share training. So when they're having a training intervention and different sorts of things, then I attend those things as well, because it just helps me become more informed and have that knowledge more accessible to ourselves.
Okay, so Balai, you've been very quiet. Do you have a website, or do you have online information where the general devotees can go? They can access information about the CPO?
So as of now, there's no local website available with the information, but what is available are the international websites. And on the international website, there'll be guidelines and all the necessary information. But also, I think at a local level, we are also encouraging temple leaders to put out the names, the faces, and the contact details of those who are involved with the CPO and the CPTs in their regions.
Okay, and obviously you need a budget for this. Is this budget covered by SANC?
So from our knowledge, well, my knowledge, there's no budget that is put aside for us. However, in the event that we do require training in person, there is room for negotiation to, with our temple leaders to request some sort of budget. But as you know, due to current circumstances, everything that's been happening has been taking place at a very remote level. So as of now, there's no real dire need for a budget unless we were in person.
Okay, so when I'm talking about budget, I'm looking at maybe a website, because I've gone online and I've seen there's a website for the North American, towns or North America. There's one in the UK. I think Australia's got one. But what about one for South Africa or even Africa? So you'd need some kind of, I don't know, money, because, to do a website, you need some money. Isn't that important though?
I think it is important, because if you look at the need that we're speaking about, we're talking about promoting child protection, we're talking about bringing awareness. So there is some necessity for, that budget to push us out there and make us more familiar, make the aims and the purpose of the CPO more familiar to everyone. So there is definitely a need for that.
So I guess one of the two of you would be speaking to SANC. Oh, I think Vraja's disappeared. She was scared going to ask her for some money.
No, so it's definitely something that will have to be discussed, because as you're saying, it's a very vital component of our movement. So there's no real negotiation whether we need it or not. It is a need.
I think it's a big need, because that's a first port of call. Everybody Googles. So if I had to Google Child Protection South Africa, nothing would come up. So if we had a website, and then devotees know this is where we can go, this is what we can do. And if your training dates for parents, or for anyone for that matter who's interested in child protection, it's such a vital role. So in terms of how much resources are you equipped with, and what is essential that you require?
So in terms of resources, all CPOs receive training, both at a basic and an advanced level. So the CPO and the CPTs are trained in a way where we can play all the roles. We can be case managers, we can be interviewers, we can be part of the Adjudication Panel. So that training is there and it's available for all of us. And I think that is the essential part, in terms of resources, being equipped with skills, which is something that is happening. And I think as time goes and as you get the opportunities to serve in different capacities, you gain so much of experience, so much of insight, so much of knowledge. And I think that's also where your roles and your understanding grows, when you become more and more involved.
You know, one thing I remember, my son's now all grown up. When he was little, taking him to the temple, there was this mantra in my head, and I used to always say to him, stranger danger. So how do we teach our kids to be safe, considering that when you go to a temple and they see devotees with tilak, and you greeting everybody Haribol,
yeah,
how do you make them aware still stranger danger?
So, I think, in Vraja, Mataji, you can back me up on this. This term stranger danger, it's a little inadequate. It's not so substantial. It requires so much of supplementary information. So myself as an educator, someone who works with, young adults and children, you're asking the question, how do we teach our children to be safe? And I think step one is create or establish a relationship of trust with them. Let children, whether it's your own child, and I think Vraja can also add on at some point because she's a mother, let the child that either is yours or that you're working with, let them know that they need to be able to identify someone that they trust, someone that they know they can go to, someone that they feel safe around, someone that they can talk to about things. And it's also about bringing awareness to them. There's a lot of taboo topics that we have, and we kind of think to ourselves, oh, let's not talk about that, or maybe I shouldn't speak to children about that, maybe it triggers something. But we need to understand that according to time, place, and circumstance and knowledge of the child, at some point we're going to have these conversations, and at very different levels, perhaps different cognitive levels, or the way that we perhaps water it down and then begin to concentrate certain topics. Who do you talk to? What do you do if you're feeling uncomfortable? So these are the questions that we need to bring up with our children and ask them, what would you do in that situation? And then as a mentor, as an educator, as a parent, you say, this is what you should do. So maybe Vraja could also add on, seeing that she herself is also a mom.
Yeah, sure. Mathura, definitely. Stranger danger is an inadequate message. So I grew up with that message as well. And that's really not it, because it's exactly what you said. Anybody in a dhoti or a tilak is not a familiar face. And therefore, educating children on this message, and that being able to trust who you're comfortable with and who you're not comfortable with. So some of the training that we do with children is exactly that. What makes me feel uncomfortable and what makes me feel comfortable, and educating parents to actually trust on that. So for instance, we've had a little girl in our community, quite a feisty little girl as well, and she refused to hug somebody. And here it was, everybody's like, no, just hug that, Mataji, just hug that, Prabhu. And we're like, but don't force our children, because now the child is unable to distinguish what's right and what's wrong anymore, because she obviously wasn't comfortable with the situation, but we're forcing children into that. So that's why it's so much about education and awareness as to what feels right for you, what feels right, and what signs, like, especially for little children, what does my body tell me when I'm feeling scared or when I'm unsure or whatever. And we train kids in this very subtle ways in terms of being able to recognize when they're in a situation that's not comfortable for them, and then what to do. So for instance, like shout, scream, run, that sort of just simple messages so that they know what to do. Yeah.
I was just thinking about my son, and of course, this is going back over 20 odd years ago. He was little, and all babies or toddlers, they're cute and they want to run around, and you get all kinds of people wanting to carry them. And how do you say, I'm not comfortable with this? Just no. How do you do it?
Absolutely. And I mean, I don't know if Balai will remember when I had, when Krishangi was a baby, I always had this baby carrier. I always wore her. She was always to me until she was like a little older, because what tends to happen is that one person has the baby and this baby is being passed along.
True.
Yes, and I remember being at Shishi Radharadhanath one year, and somebody took my child. She was a toddler at the time. And the next thing I knew was, I have no idea where this child is, because she got passed along by 5 different people. And the next thing I know, she was down at the playground from the temple room. And, you know, that's a long distance away. So I think it's about educating our community as well, in that it's not that I'm being a stuck-up mom or I don't trust devotees, but it's respecting our boundaries and what we're comfortable with. And I think that for me is the key part, is that we need to be able to respect each other's boundaries. While, you know, I might be more liberal and comfortable with my child running around or being with a lot of people, there are other moms who are not going to be comfortable. And so we need to be able to respect that when somebody says, you know, no, I'm not comfortable, then, you know, let's just let it be and do that.
Oh, true. You know, it's just, yeah, that's true. You know, if I think about, you know, everybody wants to hold the baby or the toddler, whether it's to give, you know, to bless the child. But as a mom, you've got this, like, almost like a helicopter mom, like, where's my child? Where's my child? So it's like, you know, it's a, I don't know, perilous little journey, or, you know, it's, how, I don't know how to put it in words, but I didn't want to offend. And at the same time, I was super concerned, because it takes a second for a child to disappear or something to happen to your child. So, you know, it's just, yeah. And of course, you know, back in the day, there was no CPO office.
Yeah, no, definitely.
This one's another one for you, Balai. Our temples and devotee communities proactive in keeping our children safe? You know, for example, 2 temple presidents screen devotees who are wanting to join?
So as of February 1998, it became ISKCON law that, you know, whether you were part of GBC, whether you are a guru, a temple president, a leader of some sort, or a resident, it was absolutely mandatory that there was some level of screening that took place. And even those who lived on the property of the temple, who were regarded as residents, it was absolutely necessary that they are screened. And temple leaders, you know, as far as my knowledge goes, you know, in my region, are always on board for this, because as the CPO, the screening, it is to make reasonable inquiries about individuals who are going to be on temple property, you know, where potentially young children and young adults are going to be. And again, Vraja can also, you know, vouch for what I'm saying. It's that screening is highly effective, because not only does it safeguard the temple and the individuals there, but it's more importantly safeguarding our children. And when we screen individuals, we have such vital information about them, which proves to be helpful to our temple leaders. You know, we know who's on our property, we know where they're coming from, and, you know, to what capacity they're supposed to be serving. And I think it also, you know, the screening process reduces risks of us having incidences that, you know, unfortunately, you know, we wouldn't want. So CPO, in that sense, in the screening, it is merely to eradicate, you know, prevention is better than cure. We're trying to eradicate, you know, moments of risk and negligence.
Yeah. So I think what I could add on there is it's not just our residents. So definitely, as Balai said, we do that, but we actually take it a step further. So all international guests coming into South Africa as well, they get screened as well. So what tends to happen is, so for instance, we have between all of the central offices, you know, internationally, we have a database of everybody that has had a sanction put against them. So we have access, I have access to that, for instance, and we have that so that if somebody, for instance, is sanctioned in India or in Russia or somewhere, you know, we don't have visibility to that. That person might not be allowed to give class and give kirtan, or be allowed at temples, or to stay over, and decides to visit. You know, nowadays it's so easy to travel. Well, pre-COVID, that is. And we get devotees that come over So we asked temple leaders also to screen that sort of thing as well, because remember, anybody sitting on the Vyasasang or anybody leading kirtan or doing an arti is seen as a position of authority in ISKCON, which means that you're seen in a position of trust. And so a child or youth, anybody is going to trust them, and they could have had other incidents in their past. So definitely we screen from that perspective as well, and we grant clearance before their visit is approved to South Africa, especially if it's something that's a nationally coordinated visit. We definitely do that.
One thing Balai mentioned was since 1998, but obviously we did not have a CPO office in 1998. When did it start in South Africa?
In South Africa, the CPO started, I can't actually remember. So we've had Champukalata Mataji heading up the CPO office for quite a while now. So we've had probably for close to 15 years at least, I think, that we've had the CPO, and Champukalata Mataji actually headed up the international office as well for a long time. And I know she trained me over a decade ago in child protection training. And so I served as a local child protection office for Cape Town as well. And then I think it was in 2019 sometime that I took over the national office for South Africa.
So if I'm hearing correctly, you're saying that for the last 15 years that devotees have been screened who live in a temple.
Supposed to have been, yes. So what's been happening is that it's been very difficult to get compliance done. So as much as what Balai said that it is ISKCON law and that we're supposed to be able to do it, actually getting temple leaders and things to comply has been difficult. But we can say safely for recent years, definitely they all are screening. So for example, as long as I've been in office, I know that temple leaders do have those screening forms. They do pass it through to us. We do look at it. We do give our opinion on it. And even in Champukalata Mataji's time before me, I know that she also had those forms because my husband was a leader here in Cape Town. And I know we had to go through that screening process that everybody filled out a form before they came, before they took up residence at the temple. So definitely to different degrees, temples have been following that. Whether all, I can't vouch for that for however long.
Okay, one other thing I wanted to touch on, Vraja, is that you mentioned international people coming over here, that they also screened, and then you have access to a database where, you know, you can see if this person is clear, not clear, or if they've done something. We as the, devotee community, shouldn't we be aware of whoever's coming in, that there's a history, especially if I have a young child, I'd like to know? Or is that, again, we, I don't know, that person's confidentiality is being broken? Yeah.
So that database is confidential. So even our GBCs don't have access to that database. It's just, it's actually surprising. I thought for some, the Child Protection Office is actually so removed from the management in that they don't have access to it, and it's just the different national directors that have access to it. The reason why it's not made public is the same thing that we see in the secular world. It's only recently that there's talk of having these different registers made public so that we can see that if in your vicinity there's any child molesters, abusers that have been convicted and they're now out of jail, for instance. So we know that there's sensitivity around that. There is a confidentiality issue because once the names of the person are released, then there's questions around the victim as well as the child. And so there's, all of those things come into play. And at the end, I guess we also try to say that they are devotees, so they have done certain things. They hopefully have undertaken to take remedial action. And maybe we can touch on that as well a little bit just now, in terms of the remedial actions that they take. And so that we'll still try to reintegrate them if they've suitably met certain requirements. And so that's why we do keep that part confidential. So I guess we have to trust in that the leaders will follow the processes of the Child Protection Office and do screen whoever is coming in so that we're not exposed to any of that.
So if somebody's coming into the country, would the leaders first come to your office and say, this person wants to come, is it okay?
Yeah, so that's what's happening traditionally, and especially where it's a coordinated visit. So Bhakta X or Sannyasi X is coming into the country and we're arranging for a trip for this person. Is everything fine? And then we'll go through the clearance. We'll check if there's been any sanctions against this person. We even ask them to provide, like, assistants or servants or whoever's coming with them, because it could be that Bhakta X has something against them as well. And so we do screen that from that perspective. So yeah, definitely.
So our leaders, our teachers, our senior devotees in the community, how well educated are they in child protection? Because, as ISKCON, that we have open programs, we have big festival days. I'm not talking about COVID, I'm talking about pre-COVID. How safe are those open programs? And our leaders, teachers, and senior devotees, what do they know about child protection?
So all leaders are supposed to undergo the child protection training. So we have trained all of them. They all have knowledge of what child protection is. All devotees that have services with children, it's also compulsory for them to undergo training. So for example, all of our Sunday school teachers have received the child protection training as well, so that they're able to understand what abuse is, to be able to look out for those telltale signs as well. As part of our training, we also train them to be able to create safe areas for them. So when we have our Sunday schools, what's recommended practice, what's not recommended practice. For instance, if we're having Rath Yatras, what should be done, what shouldn't be done. And that's also where the local teams come into play, because they need to be able to ask the questions of leaders. Is this a safe area? Do we have consent forms signed for if parents are leaving their kids with you? All of those different things need to come into play. And we have recommended practices for those things. And those are parts of the training that the various child protection teams in the region undergo as well. So most people have that training, a lot of devotees. I mean, in lockdown itself, we've trained a further 45 devotees on this training, just so that there's more awareness in terms of what to do, what not to do.
Okay, great. It'd be nice to have, Sunday programs when we start having Sunday programs again, just to educate devotees who come. Hopefully we'll have full temples by next year.
Yeah, we're all hoping for that.
Okay, so now, can you take us through the steps, Vraj? From the time you receive a complaint, what are the different steps that you do?
All right. So typically we'll get the complaint to different means, right? So typically a complaint will either come to the local child protection team, a temple leader, or sometimes directly to the central office. Wherever the complaint comes, so if it comes to the temple leader or the local child protection team, they need to notify the central office. So they need to notify myself, and then we'll need to advise them in terms of next steps. So what generally happens is at that stage, even though they're trained and they know what the steps are, at that point it's panic. And so we'll advise them again in terms of the different steps. So the first and most important thing is to ensure that the child is protected. So we need to see, what was the situation that's happened? Do they require immediate medical or professional assistance? And so we see to that. We also try to make sure that the child and the alleged perpetrator are not in the same vicinity. So we need to ensure that the child is safe. So we try to provide whatever support is required, and support to the child, that is. As well as the parent, because usually at that stage, it's a really difficult situation for them. What's also important is that it's our duty as child protection teams to ensure that we comply with the law. And so if there is child abuse happening, and it is according to our law as well, that it needs to be reported to the secular authorities as well. So we do encourage that this needs to be reported legally as well. So whether the police or social services need to be brought into it, that's there. What tends to happen is that sometimes the parent or the child, whoever's reported this, doesn't actually want it made a legal situation. So we provide as much support as we can give in that instance. If it does go the legal route, then the child protection teams and the CPO will not hinder or interfere in that investigation, but rather cooperate and give whatever support is required. From a process point of view, what we do at that point then is we then appoint a case manager who will keep record of everything, and then a team who will then interview and gather facts from both the parties. Of course, if the alleged perpetrator is not somebody that is, for instance, a parent, then we'll need to let them know that there is the complaint against them and that this is now going to be investigated. That information is all then gathered, and then an adjudication panel is set up. And typically the adjudication panel is a panel that looks at all of the information that's been gathered, and they use this to come to a decision as to what has occurred. The adjudication panel is typically asked to confirm that they neither know the victim nor the alleged abuser or perpetrator. And typically what we do is the adjudication panel will be from members of the CPO from another region. So for instance, I'm usually asked to adjudicate on cases in North America, the UK, or India, for instance, but not in South Africa. We tend to recuse ourselves from the local region because usually the communities are so small that we know each other. So we want to avoid for any bias coming into that. So those are the broad overall steps that we follow.
And typically, how long does it take to complete a case once the complaint comes in?
So typically it'll depend on the type of case and the extent of the investigation and the extent of the alleged abuse. It can be a couple of days to months to years, unfortunately. So it's almost like when you're watching Law and Order on TV, things can go on forever sometimes, just because of sometimes people don't want to speak to you. Or people, just one time. So even victims themselves, sometimes they'll come forward and they'll want to speak, but then they almost as if they've done that part and then they want to be left alone and they're not ready to speak further at that point. So sometimes it's straightforward and sometimes it takes a while. And then of course, in terms of the adjudication, depends on how much information has been gathered. That deliberation process then can take a couple of weeks at least. And then if something's not clear and requires further clarification, then they need to go back to the case managers and the interviewing panel to get further information or to re-interview or to gather some additional facts, for instance.
So if a perpetrator has been found guilty, do you inform the community or do you only inform the leaders, or does it go to this little place where only the CPO office knows about it?
So what happens is that once a decision has been made, that decision is then communicated in writing to the perpetrator, to the victim, as well as then the GBC, the guru, and the local management is also informed. We don't inform the community at large, again, due to the confidentiality concerns. So the record is kept in that central database, of course, but we do inform the local management so that they're aware. They're also then aware of the sanctions or suspension conditions that have been put on the person. So typically what would happen is the different types of restrictions that can be imposed, for instance, is the person cannot hold positions of leadership or publicly represent ISKCON. They can't reside at the temple or any other ISKCON center, for instance. They can't give class, lead kirtan, can't be involved in services involving children, or also in most instances is they can't be present at the same time as the victim, especially at the same center or temple. So we do need to let temple management know that this person has had these sanctions against them, so they know that they can't engage that person in those services depending on what their restrictions are. And of course we let their guru know so that the guru also knows how to engage them or not engage them in different services. So yeah.
So has it ever happened where you have a perpetrator who's been found guilty, the management's been informed, but devotees don't know, and it's happened to somebody else. So as you know, you have one victim, and then because nobody knows in the community, it happens to somebody else. Have you had a situation like that ever before?
Not to my knowledge. So the other thing about South Africa is, thankfully, we've had very few cases of child abuse that have been escalated to the Child Protection Office. If there has been more abuse that has happened, it hasn't come to our attention. There hasn't actually also been cases that have come as long as I'm in the office. So there've been older cases that I've had to review, or if there was an appeal that came in or something, but there aren't any active cases at the moment. So from the international cases that I'm aware of as well, there hasn't been incidents where once they have been sanctioned or suspended, that there've been further abuse, because what tends to happen is word does spread. So even though we haven't made it public knowledge, you know, ISKCON News Network does
it works really well.
So it does spread, yeah, so I haven't come across any cases of where that has happened, thankfully.
So yeah, true. So in terms of the perpetrator, do you advocate like rehabilitation? Do you oversee it, or do you suggest to the perpetrator, this is what you need to do? Yeah,
so there's certain conditions that are set out, usually depending on the type of abuse and the level of abuse. There's certain requirements that are put on the person as well. So for instance, a psychological evaluation is required, so that you know whether this was, you know, there's a deep-rooted problem, or whether this was, you know, once-off fit of rage, for example, which also indicates something then, because a fit of rage is not just a once-off thing, that's also another underlying problem. So we need to know that. So generally a psychological evaluation is done to indicate, you know, was this a once-off type of thing, or whether there is a deeper problem. And that would also then indicate that further treatment or remedial action is required. So that usually forms part of the decision as well, in that, you know, it's come to the conclusion that you have X, Y, and Z, and you're required to undergo counseling for, you know, once a month for the next year, or whatever it is. So that forms part of the terms of which that they need to fulfill. And what tends to happen is, depending on the type of abuse and the level of abuse, the conditions or the restrictions that are set out would be for a particular term, or sometimes a lifetime term, depending on the severity. So especially when it's, you know, for a specific term, then they still need to fulfill these other conditions. So it doesn't matter that we say, oh, you know, you're not allowed to give classes and do RTs for 5 years, but then you don't undergo these other steps that we've also suggested. So you need to fulfill all of those criteria in order to be reintegrated into society again. And once that happens, it doesn't mean that, okay, so I've gone for my counseling and it is 5 years or 10 years or whatever. Now, hey, ho, I just step back into where I am. What we do suggest then is, you know, some sort of mentoring, so that you can actually rehabilitate back into the devotee community again. Because remember also, they've kind of would have stepped away from the community and not really been in close contact for whatever reasons. So that sort of thing helps to get them back in as well.
So this counseling, is it in-house, is it in ISKCON, or do you have like a list of psychologists that you recommend who are not devotees?
So that's typically not devotees, and it's typically at their expense.
Oh, okay.
So that's also why some people don't undergo that. But of course, if they need that, then we'll need to figure out how to fund that. I mean, for the victim, we also recommend that they undergo counseling and necessary assistance where that would help them. And if they need assistance with that, then that's where we'd need to ask for the funding that Balai referred to in terms of, because then we need to help them. But for the perpetrator, we usually leave that at their own expense, because they need to prove themselves as well and prove that they're committed.
So in terms of counseling for the victim, obviously you don't provide it, they've got to go out because you don't have the budget for that, right?
So we try to, so we do offer it, and that's when we go to get funding from either the local temple or something. So it's not that we make it the victim's problem. What we have found in a few instances in South Africa is that the victim wants to have nothing to do with ISKCON. And I was actually chatting to a psychologist friend of mine, and they also said that it's like almost as if they're not going to take help from where they felt they were abused, because that's not going to sort of liberate them almost. So in a lot of instances, we see that happening, that the victim will not be taking any assistance even from this child protection office. They'll listen and they'll go through the process, but if we offer the counseling and support, they'd rather do it on their own than take it from us. In the rare instances, they do though.
And do you keep tabs on these victims, like, 10 years later, where is this person?
Yeah, so that one is a difficult one, of course, because I'm sort of newish to the role. But in the cases that I've reviewed, I try to keep in contact. Of course, there's this fine line and barrier between them wanting to move on and not be reminded of this thing. So as much as they're open to having some sort of contact and relationship, it's there. I have tried to check in on a few devotees in that respect. Some keep in touch, and some have some sort of relationship with me. So that's great. And others just they want to be left alone and not reminded of that situation or circumstances.
So Vraj, you touched on something, and I want Balai to answer this. ISKCON News Network. It works exceedingly well. So we hear whispers in the community of something that's happened or an alleged abuse. So if I've heard certain whispers, or, I know something, should I remain silent, or should I contact your office and say, I'm a little bit concerned? So there's pros and cons to that. I don't want to be implicated in anything, but at the same time, I want to do something good. So what should I do?
So there's a very old and cliche saying that goes, and I think it's typically associated with the police force, but nonetheless, I think it's applicable. And the saying goes, if you see something, say something. And I mean, if you have a reason, and with good reason, to believe that a child is at risk of abuse or is undergoing some abuse, I think, to some extent, being part of this movement, we all have some responsibility to, report to our local CPOs, a report about our concerns. And, you were mentioning the pros and cons as the person, what implications are there for me? If I am to say something, do I get dragged into this? What happens to me? And I think, like Vraja was mentioning, somewhere at the beginning of our conversation, there's a very strong ethic in confidence and keeping confidentiality. So it's not that, if you're going to approach the CPO about concerns that you have regarding a child, that your name, necessarily becomes mentioned. You remain anonymous, but again, I'm circling back to the point that we all have responsibility, not just on that material plane, but if we look at, our movement and the essence of it, and the importance, of children and our responsibility towards them in their spiritual lives, it's really important that if you see something, you must say something. But at the same time, understand that with the CPO, there is a high level of ethic and confidentiality in who is reporting or saying something.
I think importantly as well, according to our laws, is that the onus is on every individual to actually report if they're aware of child abuse that's happening. So that's there. That's a mandated requirement of certain levels of responsibility. So like leaders and teachers and police, for instance, are supposed to report this. So as leaders and community leaders, we actually have a responsibility. If we're aware of something, that we're supposed to report it. There's also currently in the domestic violence bill, an amendment that's going through, that you could actually be charged if you're aware of something and you keep quiet. So that's currently still, it hasn't been promulgated yet, but that is coming, because we hear so much. I mean, we know that there's so much abuse going on in the community, in the wider community, in secular community, where people just keep quiet. You turn a blind eye. The ostrich, I bury my head. I'm not going to worry about it. I don't know it. But it is what it is. We need to be able to speak out. I think whenever we have our child protection trainings, I say it takes a village to raise a child, and it takes that same village to protect that child. So it's all of our responsibilities to ensure that we actually protect our children.
Okay, we've run way over time, but I have one last question for you, Vraj. You mentioned the independence of the CPO office. So, the CPO office is very independent from the South African National Council and leadership. But, you have a dual role. You are chairman of the National Council. So
Yes.
What mechanism is in place to ensure judicial prudence or judicial independence on your part?
Yeah. So like I mentioned, yes, the CPO functions independently from management. As to my specific circumstances as the co-chair of the South African National Council, as the chair, I'm not involved in the operational management of the different temples. So I'm separate from that. My chairing is around, facilitation, ensuring proper governance, effective operations of things. If anything, I'm able to use that a little bit to ensure child protection gets taken a little bit more seriously. I have an extra stick. But yeah, to be serious about it, yes, in terms of the judicial independence, like I mentioned as well, if there's any situation that would arise where there's a conflict of interest, I'd have to select one role or the other. And if anything actually had to come up in South Africa during 2021, which is the year that I'm co-chairing, I'd recuse myself from involved in that case. And that's also why I'm getting other devotees involved, like Balai, for instance, in the central office, so that it's beyond just me. And as I mentioned before, in terms of the adjudication panels, we usually would divert that to other regions as well. So if something has to come up in South Africa and it's believed that I'm too close to the leadership of South Africa, there's always the national directors of other regions or the international office that would take over to oversee the case to ensure that it's completely unbiased and goes ahead without any sorts of influence of myself for some or the other reason.
Thank you very much. Vraj, Balai, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. It's been so informative. I think we should have, more workshops like this where we can be educated. It was very, educational for me. I'm always wary whenever I see parents with young children, I'm like, keep your eye on kids. Don't lose sight of them. So it will be so nice if you can let us know when you have training programs. We can advertise it on the Women's Collective. I think it's such an important role that you're fulfilling. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Definitely, yes. I think we will be having sessions with our parents. Usually that forms part of the local team's responsibilities to educate parents. But seeing as everything is now virtual, we've been initiating that we'll actually have something with parents and just the general community. So yeah, we'll definitely let you know so that we can reach more people to educate them. I think last year we had a cyber safety awareness program, and it was shocking how little the adults in the room realized how much they were exposed to different things. So definitely we'll be looking forward to sharing that. And of course, I thank you for the opportunity. It is indeed such an important topic that's often overlooked. So we appreciate you actually taking the time and effort for engaging with us. And if there's anybody who would like to engage with us, we will put up our details in terms of how we can be contacted. And we're happy to assist wherever we can. So thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.